To be betwixt and between is to be nowhere, yet also everywhere. To stand at the threshold is to face dissolution, but also infinite possibility. What if the unease we feel in times of transition is not a sign of failure, but an invitation to shed the old and embrace the new? What if the disorientation of liminal spaces signals the dissolving of the ego, clearing the ground for a more authentic self to emerge? And what if consciously navigating these in-between states could accelerate our personal evolution, leading to a life of greater purpose and meaning? For millennia, humanity has encountered these unsettling yet potentially transformative periods, developing rituals, myths, and practices to navigate the uncertain terrain of transition. The concept of liminality finds its roots in anthropology, particularly in the work of Arnold van Gennep, who meticulously studied rites of passage across diverse traditional societies. Van Gennep identified 3 distinct stages within these rites: separation, liminality, and incorporation. It is the liminal phase, the ambiguous middle ground between the familiar past and the uncertain future, that holds particular significance. This stage, often perceived as dangerous, represents a symbolic death, a stripping away of the old identity to make way for a new one. Building upon Van Gennep's work, Victor Turner further explored the dynamics of liminality, highlighting the emergence of communitas, a profound sense of collective unity and equality that frequently arises during these transitional experiences. Liminality, then, is not merely an abstract anthropological concept, but a universal human experience, deeply intertwined with our fundamental desire for meaning, purpose, and profound transformation. Whether marked by external events, such as career shifts or relocation, or by internal shifts, such as a change in values or a spiritual awakening, transitions touch the very core of our being. Yet modernity has, in many ways, complicated our relationship with these liminal states. Traditional rites of passage, once providing structure and guidance, have largely disappeared from modern life, leaving many individuals ill-equipped to navigate major life transitions. This lack of clear markers and communal support has contributed to heightened anxiety, a pervasive sense of uncertainty, and a feeling of being profoundly lost in the face of change. Given these challenges, how can we consciously engage with liminal spaces, not as periods of fear and uncertainty to be avoided, but as potent catalysts for psychological growth, shadow integration, and the profound journey of individuation? How do we recover these lost rituals of transition, consciously directing our own transformative processes, rather than being swept away by the tides of change? This exploration will delve into the psychological dynamics of transitions, illuminating the processes of ego dissolution, shadow integration, and archetypal activation. We will examine the role of liminality in mythology and culture, drawing insights from initiation rites, the archetypal hero's journey, and the symbolism of sacred spaces. Ultimately, we will uncover practical techniques for embracing transitions, integrating practices of mindfulness, shadow work, and symbolic ritual into our daily lives. By engaging with this content, you will not only gain intellectual understanding, but also acquire practical tools for navigating periods of uncertainty with greater awareness, cultivating resilience in the face of change, and fostering profound psychological growth. So, let us embark on this journey to explore the psychology of liminal spaces and discover how to harness their transformative power. Is it merely the absence of a destination or a deeper psychological reality that defines the uncanny feeling of being in a liminal space? These are zones of ambiguity and disorientation, places and times in between. While we often think of physical liminal spaces, empty hallways, airport terminals at dawn, abandoned buildings, the psychological experience of liminality extends far beyond these physical locations. Periods of grief, career transitions, identity shifts, and spiritual awakenings can all be understood as psychological liminal spaces. It is not merely the place, but the feeling of being in between, that defines the experience. The psychological characteristics of liminal spaces are marked by uncertainty, disorientation, and a sense of detachment from the familiar. In these in-between places, one often experiences a heightened self-awareness, a feeling of being betwixt and between the old and the new. Normal rules and expectations are temporarily suspended, leaving the individual in a state of flux. What does this suspension feel like? It is more than just a mental state. It's a felt experience that profoundly impacts the individual's sense of self and their relationship to the world. These spaces evoke strong emotional reactions, ranging from debilitating anxiety and paralyzing fear to overwhelming excitement and hopeful anticipation. This is because, at its heart, the liminal space is one of temporary ego suspension, a hinting at ego death and the opportunity for ego reconstruction. In the throes of transition, the familiar structures of our identity begin to crumble, paving the way for profound psychological shifts. This process often entails ego dissolution, the breaking down of old identities, beliefs, and attachments. Is this not reminiscent of the alchemical process of solutio, where a substance is dissolved to its fundamental components, its base elements? What occurs when all is brought back to the beginning? This ego dissolution can be a painful and profoundly disorienting experience, one that directly challenges our sense of control and predictability. Feelings of anxiety, fear, and a disconcerting loss of meaning often accompany this process. Yet it is within this very dissolution that the potential for profound transformation resides, an opportunity that must be seized. But what if these disorienting experiences also activate powerful archetypes within the unconscious? The trickster archetype, for example, emerges as a symbol of chaos and uncertainty, disrupting established patterns and challenging our sense of order. Simultaneously, the shadow, that embodiment of repressed aspects of the self, rises to the surface, demanding recognition and integration. The activation of these archetypes can be both unsettling and deeply transformative, for it is through confronting these hidden aspects of the psyche that we unlock new potential. Yet it is precisely this ego dissolution that creates space for new perspectives, values, and a more authentic sense of self to emerge, all of which begs the question: why are these archetypes activated? Mythology and literature are replete with recurring motifs of liminal spaces, offering profound insights into the human experience of transition. Consider the role of threshold guardians in countless myths and fairy tales, figures that block the way to new realms, demanding that the hero confront their deepest fears and limitations. Cerberus, the multi-headed hound guarding the gates of the underworld in Greek mythology, stands as a potent symbol of this challenge. Similarly, dragons guarding treasure in countless fairy tales represent the obstacles that must be overcome to attain personal growth and transformation. What is being guarded, if not the very source of power and renewal? Across cultures and throughout history, initiation rites and heroic journeys share a common thread: the symbolic significance of death and rebirth. These narratives often involve a symbolic death of the old self, followed by a period of liminality, a time of testing, reflection, and transformation, and a subsequent rebirth into a new identity, forever changed by the trials endured. The hero descends into the underworld, battles monstrous forces, and emerges, transformed, with newfound wisdom and strength. In many cultures, rites of passage involve a ritualistic separation from the community, a period of isolation and testing, and a subsequent reintegration into society with a new status and identity. But what does this look like in the modern day? The dark night of the soul, as described by Christian mystics such as St. John of the Cross, represents just such a liminal experience leading to spiritual awakening. During this period of profound darkness and despair, the individual experiences a complete breakdown of their former self, stripping away false beliefs and attachments to reveal a deeper truth. Dante's Inferno, similarly, depicts a journey through the depths of hell, a symbolic descent into the shadow, culminating in a profound spiritual transformation. These accounts suggest that these experiences, though terrifying, are essential for the soul's evolution. But can these dark nights be navigated with intention? Jungian analysis offers compelling case studies illustrating the transformative potential of consciously navigating liminal spaces. Individuals have used dreams, active imagination, and symbolic interpretation to understand and integrate their experiences, unlocking hidden potential and fostering profound personal growth. One such case, recounted by Jung himself, involved a patient struggling with a midlife crisis. Through dream analysis, the patient confronted their repressed desires and fears, ultimately leading to a more authentic and fulfilling life. Another such case, presented by Van France, involved a young woman in career transition who felt deeply lost. Through the process of active imagination, this woman connected with her inner archetypes and found newfound purpose in her work. What if we do not have a Jungian analyst to guide us through the process? In essence, the information presented so far reveals a powerful connection between ego dissolution, archetypal activation, and shadow integration within the crucible of liminal spaces. Feeling lost is not a sign of failure, but a necessary stage for ego dissolution, the shedding of old identities to make way for the new. The shadow, that hidden aspect of our personality, often resists change, clinging to the familiar and safe, which often keeps us in our comfort zone. Yet, consciously facing the shadow in liminal spaces, embracing the uncomfortable truths it reveals, can lead to greater self-awareness and wholeness. The greater the resistance, the more vital the change, implying that our greatest fears often point to our greatest potential. How do we consciously engage with these liminal states rather than avoid them? What specific practices can assist shadow work? So, let us now explore these techniques that will allow us to harness the transformative power of liminal spaces. How can we transform the discomfort of liminal spaces into opportunities for profound growth? Instead of passively enduring the uncertainty of transition, one can actively engage with it, reclaiming agency over their personal narrative. These techniques are not about eliminating the discomfort inherent in such experiences, but about cultivating the capacity to navigate them with greater awareness, resilience, and intention. After all, is it not the friction of change that forges strength, the discomfort that signals the potential for expansion? The key is to recognize that discomfort is not an obstacle, but a guidepost, a signal pointing toward areas that require attention and integration. To simply endure the discomfort is to miss the opportunity for growth that the liminal space presents. It is to remain stuck between worlds, unable to fully embrace the new. But how can we move beyond passive endurance and into active engagement? Mindfulness, shadow work, and ritual practices emerge as three key approaches to engaging with liminality, each offering unique benefits in navigating the complexities of transition. However, it is crucial to remember that other techniques can be used as well. Mindfulness, in this context, is the practice of cultivating present moment awareness, the ability to observe one's thoughts and emotions without judgment, creating space for greater clarity and insight. It is not about suppressing or avoiding difficult feelings, but about acknowledging them, understanding them, and allowing them to pass, much like clouds drifting across the sky. Mindfulness provides a grounding presence amidst the turbulence of transition, a stable anchor in the face of uncertainty. Furthermore, it allows one to observe the ego's desperate attempts to cling to the familiar, creating an opportunity to consciously choose a different path. But how can simply observing one's thoughts lead to transformation? Shadow work, on the other hand, is the process of consciously exploring and integrating repressed aspects of the self, those qualities that have been disowned, denied, or rejected. This involves identifying and understanding shadow qualities, rather than simply suppressing or denying them. It is a process of bringing the unconscious into the light of conscious awareness. Embracing shadow aspects does not mean acting upon negative or harmful compulsions, but acknowledging their place within the totality of the self. It means understanding the roots of these impulses, recognizing their symbolic significance, and integrating their energy in a constructive way. Through shadow work, one can reclaim lost aspects of their personality, unlock hidden potential, and move toward greater wholeness. But how can we face those parts of ourselves that we have long tried to hide? Ritual practices, finally, offer a powerful means of marking transitions, honoring the past, and creating intentions for the future. These symbolic actions can provide a sense of structure and meaning during times of uncertainty, a way to ground oneself in the midst of chaos. Rituals can be simple or elaborate, personal or communal. What matters most is the intention behind them. They can involve anything from lighting a candle and setting an intention to performing a more elaborate ceremony with specific symbols and gestures. Ultimately, rituals provide a framework for processing emotions, releasing attachments, and stepping into a new phase of life with conscious awareness. But are rituals merely empty gestures, or do they hold a deeper psychological significance? To illustrate the real-world application of these techniques, consider the case of Sarah, who was navigating a career transition using mindfulness. Overwhelmed by anxiety and uncertainty, she began practicing daily mindfulness meditation, focusing on her breath and observing her thoughts without judgment. Through this practice, she noticed a pattern of negative self-talk and fear of failure. By acknowledging these thoughts without getting carried away by them, she was able to create space for greater clarity about her values and her true aspirations. This newfound clarity allowed her to make intentional choices about her future, rather than being driven by fear and anxiety. What if Sarah had continued to allow anxiety to control her actions? Another example involves Mark, who was integrating his shadow during a difficult relationship breakup. Initially, he blamed his partner entirely for the relationship's demise, but through shadow work, he began to identify and acknowledge his own role in the breakup. He realized that he had been emotionally unavailable, distant, and critical, qualities that he had long denied within himself. By facing these shadow aspects, he was able to take responsibility for his actions, learn from his mistakes, and develop healthier patterns of relating in future relationships. This did not excuse his partner's behavior, but it did allow him to grow as an individual. But is it always possible to take responsibility in such situations? Consider, too, the historical example of the Sepik River tribes of Papua New Guinea, who utilize elaborate initiation rites to mark the transition from boyhood to manhood. These rites involve a period of isolation, physical trials, and symbolic rituals, including scarification patterns on the skin that represent the shedding of the old self and the emergence of the new. The psychological function of these rituals is to provide a framework for processing the emotional and psychological challenges of this transition, reinforcing social bonds, and instilling a sense of belonging and purpose within the community. The scars serve as a permanent reminder of the individual's transformation and their commitment to the tribe's values. Yet can these ancient traditions offer insights relevant to modern life? These techniques can, of course, be combined. Consider the case of Emily, who used all three techniques during a major life transition, moving to a new city, starting a new job, and ending a long-term relationship. She used mindfulness to manage the stress and anxiety of the move, shadow work to process the grief and loss of the relationship, and ritual practices to create a sense of closure and new beginnings. Each morning, she would meditate, focusing on her breath and setting an intention for the day. She also spent time journaling, exploring her shadow aspects and identifying any limiting beliefs that were holding her back. In the evenings, she would perform a simple ritual, such as lighting a candle and expressing gratitude for the lessons she had learned. This combined approach allowed her to navigate this challenging transition with greater resilience, self-awareness, and a sense of purpose. But is such a holistic approach always necessary, or can one technique suffice? In essence, mindfulness, shadow work, and ritual practices are not isolated tools, but rather complementary approaches to navigating transitions and fostering psychological growth. Mindfulness provides a foundation of present moment awareness. Shadow work facilitates the integration of repressed aspects of the self, and ritual practices offer a framework for marking transitions and creating intentions for the future. It is important to remember, therefore, that these techniques are not a one-size-fits-all solution, but rather a set of tools that can be adapted and combined to suit individual needs and preferences. Applying these techniques in liminal spaces can also activate specific archetypes within the unconscious, those universal patterns of behavior and symbolism that shape our experience of the world. Mindfulness, for instance, can connect one to the self-archetype, that inner sense of wholeness and integration that transcends the limitations of the ego. Shadow work, naturally, activates the shadow archetype, facilitating the integration of repressed aspects of the personality. Ritual, finally, can connect one to the magician archetype, that transformative force that empowers us to create change in our lives and in the world around us. But how do these archetypes manifest in our lives, and how can we consciously engage with them to navigate transitions with greater awareness and purpose? So, let us now turn our attention to the archetypal dimensions of liminal spaces and discover how these universal patterns can guide our journey of transformation. So, let us now turn our attention to the archetypal dimensions of liminal spaces and discover how these universal patterns can guide our journey of transformation. According to Carl Jung, archetypes are universal, inborn predispositions to experience and act in certain ways, existing within the collective unconscious. Therefore, are these not the very blueprints of the human soul? During times of transition, when the ego's defenses are weakened and the familiar structures of life dissolve, these ancient patterns can emerge with particular force, influencing our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, and shaping the very landscape of our inner world. Liminal spaces, in this sense, become fertile ground for archetypal activation, a stage upon which the dramas of the collective unconscious unfold, and it is in this space that these archetypes become activated, thus making one's own engagement with the change more meaningful. Recognizing these archetypes within oneself can provide invaluable insights into navigating the turbulence of transition, transforming feelings of being lost and disoriented into opportunities for directed growth and self-discovery. But is it possible that these archetypes only reveal themselves during times of turmoil? The answer, of course, is no. However, it is during times of change that one is more prone to noticing them and exploring them, rather than continuing on the normal path. It is important to remember that the specific archetypes that surface during a liminal period are not random occurrences, but are deeply meaningful engagements with fundamental aspects of the human condition. As one career ends, a new relationship begins, or a physical space is left behind, the archetypes that rise to prominence often reflect the psychological challenges and opportunities inherent in that particular transition. But how do we recognize these archetypes, and what do they tell us about ourselves? It is useful to think of these figures as characters in a play, each with their own distinct motivations, strengths, and weaknesses, all vying for attention on the stage of our consciousness. Consider how liminal states weaken ego defenses, allowing previously unconscious archetypes to surface and exert their influence. Among the most common archetypes activated during these periods are the seeker, the shadow, and the rebel. The seeker is driven by an insatiable need for exploration and new horizons, constantly yearning for something more, yet often vulnerable to restlessness and dissatisfaction, eternally searching but never quite finding. Thus is the seeker forever doomed to wander. The shadow, conversely, embodies the repressed aspects of the self, those qualities that have been disowned, denied, or rejected. During times of stress and uncertainty, these shadow elements can surface with considerable force, potentially leading to self-sabotage, destructive behavior, or a general sense of unease and disconnection. But is there a way to make peace with one's shadow and integrate those qualities into one's life? The rebel, finally, challenges established norms and expectations, seeking freedom and authenticity, and often dismantling old structures and creating new ones. While the rebel's iconoclasm can be a powerful force for change, it also carries the risk of alienation, recklessness, and a tendency to reject anything that smacks of convention or tradition. Does the rebel always have to stand against something? The activation of these archetypes can feel overwhelming and disorienting, as if one is being pulled in multiple directions at once. The seeker urges one to abandon everything and set off on a new adventure, while the shadow whispers doubts and fears in one's ear, and the rebel encourages the rejection of anything that feels confining or inauthentic. However, it is important to remember that the emergence of these archetypes is not necessarily a negative thing. Indeed, it offers an opportunity to understand and integrate these powerful forces within the personality, transforming potential chaos into a catalyst for growth and self-discovery. Moreover, it is important to note that specific archetypes can present as dominant or subservient based on the person, situation, and time. None are inherently good or bad, but they have tendencies that can be capitalized or mitigated. To illustrate these concepts more clearly, let's examine how these archetypes are portrayed in literature and film. Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit provides a compelling example of the seeker archetype in action. Initially content with his quiet, predictable life in the Shire, Bilbo is drawn into an adventure that awakens his innate desire for exploration and self-discovery. His initial reluctance gives way to an insatiable curiosity and a willingness to face unknown dangers, reflecting the journey into the unknown that liminal spaces often demand. However, Bilbo's relentless pursuit of adventure also carries a shadow side, as his newfound desire for gold and treasure threatens to corrupt his character, and thus is Bilbo's story not a cautionary tale. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, on the other hand, offer a chilling exploration of the shadow Doctor type. Dr. Jekyll's attempts to repress his darker impulses lead to the Cree Mr. On of Mr. Hyde, a manifestation of his unacknowledged shadow aspects. As the normal constraints of ident Mr. are loosened, Mr. Hyde emerges, wreaking havoc and destruction, and demonstrating the dangerous potential of unacknowledged shadow elements. Yet, is there something in Dr. TLY wrong with Dr. Jekyll, or is he merely a victim of his own repression? Lisbeth Salander in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo embodies the rebel archetype in its most fierce and uncompromising form. Her defiance of societal expectations, her relentless pursuit of justice, and her willingness to operate outside the bounds of conventional morality highlight the rebel's drive to dismantle old structures and create new ones, even if through unconventional or disruptive means. But does Lisbeth's rebellion ultimately lead to liberation, or does it simply perpetuate a cycle of violence and alienation? Understanding the characteristics of each archetype allows individuals to recognize these patterns in their own lives, reducing feelings of isolation and providing a framework for self-understanding. When one finds themselves drawn to new experiences and possibilities, they can recognize the influence of the seeker archetype. When one grapples with difficult emotions or destructive impulses, they can acknowledge the presence of the shadow. And when one feels compelled to challenge the status quo and fight for change, they can embrace the energy of the rebel. But here's what most people miss. These archetypes, if left unchecked, can lead to self-destruction. The seeker can become lost in endless wandering, the shadow can succumb to its darkest impulses, and the rebel can become consumed by rage and alienation. Acknowledging and understanding archetypes is essential for navigating liminal spaces with intention. However, archetypes are not meant to be mastered, only integrated, as they are fundamental to our humanity and should not be ignored. The goal is not to embody a single archetype exclusively, but to integrate different aspects of the personality to achieve balance and wholeness. This integration is not a one-time event, but a lifelong endeavor, a continuous process of self-discovery and growth. In essence, understanding archetypes provides a map of the inner world, a guide to the hidden forces that shape our experience of transition. How can we bring these archetypes into a conscious, harmonious balance to aid and accelerate our journey through periods of change and uncertainty? So, let's now turn to the practice of harmonizing these inner figures, transforming potential chaos into powerful catalysts for personal evolution. The challenge of archetypal integration lies not in eliminating certain archetypes, for they are inherent aspects of the human psyche, but rather in understanding their function and contribution to our overall development. How can we reframe perceived negative traits as potential strengths, unlocking hidden reserves of resilience and creativity? Consider the seeker's restlessness, often seen as a liability, constantly urging us toward new horizons and yet never allowing us to find contentment in the present moment. What if we viewed this restlessness as a powerful drive for innovation, a relentless curiosity that pushes us beyond the boundaries of the known? To do so, we can engage in what might be called archetypal dialogue, as a means of engaging with and integrating conflicting inner figures. This archetypal dialogue involves actively engaging with the inner figures that arise during a liminal phase. This requires self-awareness and mindful observation in identifying which archetypes are most active during a given transition. But how does one engage in this dialogue? Visualize and personify each archetype, giving them distinct voices and personalities. Imagine conversations between them, allowing them to express their underlying needs, motivations, and fears. Consider the seeker and the shadow engaged in a debate. The seeker yearns for novelty and adventure, while the shadow whispers of potential dangers and past failures. By listening to both voices, we can gain a more balanced perspective, recognizing the seeker's drive for growth while acknowledging the shadow's need for safety and security. Can we balance destructive tendencies by recognizing their potential positive contributions? Engaging in journaling and active imagination can further facilitate the archetypal dialogue. During a career shift, for instance, journaling can help you discover the influence of the rebel archetype, challenging the status quo and pushing you towards more authentic work. Use prompts such as, "What rules am I tempted to break?" or "What aspects of my current situation feel most stifling?" Active imagination involves consciously entering a dreamlike state and interacting with the archetypes that emerge. Imagine yourself sitting in a room with the seeker, the shadow, and the rebel, each vying for your attention. What do they say? How do they make you feel? By engaging in this inner dialogue, you can gain a deeper understanding of their respective agendas and begin to negotiate a more harmonious relationship between them. Remember that harmonizing archetypes is a dynamic, continuous process, not a one-time fix, as the archetypal landscape shifts depending on the specific challenges and opportunities presented by the liminal space. Having explored the idea of archetypal dialogue, let us turn our attention to techniques to calm the turbulence within, such as shadow work, goal setting, and values alignment. One of the most potent techniques for taming this turbulence is shadow work. Shadow work is a key tool for integrating repressed aspects of the self. But what exactly is the shadow, and why is it so turbulent? The shadow, as Jung described it, embodies the disowned, denied, or rejected aspects of our personality. During periods of transition, when our sense of identity is already destabilized, these shadow elements can surface with considerable force, leading to self-sabotage, destructive behavior, or a general sense of unease and disconnection. However, these shadow qualities are not inherently negative. Often, they represent untapped potential, hidden strengths, or unacknowledged needs. To embark on this journey, it helps to identify shadow qualities that surface during periods of transition. What behaviors or emotions are you most ashamed of? What aspects of yourself do you try to hide from others? Explore the origins and potential benefits of these qualities. Take, for example, the shadow's self-sabotage, often perceived as a destructive force. What if this self-sabotage is actually a protective mechanism shielding us from vulnerability and potential failure? Recognizing this underlying motivation can allow us to approach our fears with greater compassion and develop healthier coping mechanisms. Furthermore, the importance of setting clear, achievable goals that align with core values cannot be overstated, since goal setting serves as a way of channeling the seeker's energy into productive pursuits, providing direction and purpose during times of uncertainty. But how do we ensure that our goals are truly aligned with our values? Start by identifying your core values, the principles that guide your decisions and give meaning to your life. Do you value creativity, social impact, financial security, or personal growth? Once you have a clear understanding of your values, develop a career transition plan that reflects these priorities. If you value creativity, seek out roles that allow you to express your artistic talents or innovative ideas. The concept of controlled rebellion also warrants consideration as a means of harnessing the rebel's energy in a constructive way. What does controlled rebellion actually entail? Challenging established norms and expectations can lead to innovation and positive change, but it's important to do so with awareness and intention. Rather than blindly rejecting everything that feels conventional, identify specific areas where you feel constrained or limited, and then explore alternative approaches that align with your values. Instead of silently stewing in frustration, start a petition or campaign to advocate for change related to your career or lifestyle. By channeling your rebellious spirit into a productive cause, you can transform feelings of anger and resentment into a powerful force for good. Remember that while integrating archetypes within, one must always seek feedback from trusted sources to gain objective perspectives on archetypal expression. External feedback serves as a mirror, reflecting blind spots and enabling nuanced adjustments in behavior and mindset. Are you truly embodying the qualities you think you are? Do your actions align with your stated values? Seeking input from trusted friends, family members, or mentors can provide valuable insights into your archetypal expression, helping you to identify areas where you may be overemphasizing certain traits or neglecting others. Having explored these techniques for taming the turbulence of transition, let's now turn our attention to specific case studies that illustrate these techniques in action, and in turn, provide a deeper and more personalized understanding. Consider the case of a woman navigating a career transition by integrating her shadow. Initially, she struggled with self-doubt and perfectionism, which sabotaged her efforts to find a new job. She was terrified of failure and constantly compared herself to others, leading to feelings of inadequacy and despair. However, as she engaged in shadow work, she began to acknowledge the origins of her fears. She realized that her perfectionism stemmed from a deep-seated need for approval and a fear of being judged. By acknowledging these underlying emotions, she was able to develop a more compassionate and realistic approach to her goals. Instead of striving for perfection, she focused on making progress, celebrating small victories, and learning from her mistakes. By acknowledging the place of fears rather than ignoring them, she slowly but surely began to acknowledge her successes. Another case involves a man using goal setting to channel the seeker's energy during a relocation. He felt restless and disoriented in his new environment, constantly yearning for the familiar comforts of his old life. To combat these feelings, he set specific, measurable goals related to exploring his new environment, building social connections, and pursuing personal interests. He committed to visiting a new park or museum each week, joining a local sports team, and taking a class in a subject he had always been curious about. By transforming his restlessness into a sense of purpose and adventure, he was able to embrace his new life with greater enthusiasm and resilience. Underscore that new goals should reflect the new environment to ensure that they have the best impact. Beyond personal accounts, literature provides myriad examples of archetypal harmony, as seen in the character Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games. Katniss channels her rebellious spirit to challenge an oppressive regime and create a more just society. Rather than simply lashing out in anger and frustration, she strategically uses her skills and resources to undermine the Capitol's authority, inspiring others to join her cause. By harnessing the rebels' energy in a constructive way, she is able to make a tangible difference in the world, however small that difference may be at times. All techniques were utilized in the revival of Apple by Steve Jobs, who re-entered the company to revolutionize the tech industry after being forced out, and provides an excellent example. Steve Jobs acknowledged his fears, took manageable steps, and challenged the norms of the industry to re-establish his place as a tech giant. Upon his return, he acknowledged his past failures and the need for change. This allowed him to approach the situation with humility and a willingness to learn from his mistakes. Then he set clear and achievable goals, focusing on a few key products rather than spreading the company's resources too thin. Finally, he challenged the established norms of the tech industry, pushing for innovative designs and user-friendly interfaces that set Apple apart from its competitors. These actions, combined, established him as a tech giant once again. But beyond case studies, how does working with archetypes connect to broader human understanding? In essence, active engagement with archetypes through self-awareness, dialogue, and practical techniques empowers individuals to navigate liminal spaces with greater intention and resilience, reminding us that it's not about mastering archetypes, but partnering with them. By recognizing and integrating these powerful forces within the personality, we can transform potential chaos into a catalyst for growth and self-discovery. Remember that working with archetypes connects individuals to the collective unconscious, tapping into a vast reservoir of wisdom and experience. Reframing liminal experiences as opportunities to access this collective knowledge transforms feelings of isolation into a sense of interconnectedness, as these patterns connect all humanity. Serving as an indication of shared understanding across all peoples and all times. However, are these individual archetypal journeys entirely self-contained, or do they intersect with broader cultural narratives and shared human experiences of transition? What collective patterns and resources can support our individual journeys of transformation? Let's now explore the influence of culture and community on the psychology of liminal spaces, uncovering the shared resources that can support our individual journeys of transformation. As we draw towards the culmination of our exploration into the psychology of liminal spaces, let us bring together the various threads of our discussion and reflect on the deeper significance of these transitional realms. Consider a slight deceleration in your thoughts to embrace a concluding understanding. Throughout this journey, we have traversed the landscape of transitions, examining the psychological dynamics at play, the archetypal forces that shape our experiences, and the practical techniques that can empower us to navigate these often turbulent waters. From ego dissolution and shadow integration to the activation of potent archetypes, we've seen how these seemingly disparate elements intertwine to create a tapestry of personal transformation. Cultivating mindful awareness has proved a way of grounding oneself amidst the inherent uncertainties of transitional phases. By consciously working with active archetypes, we discovered how one can consciously direct their own transformation. Earlier, we set out to understand how to consciously engage with liminal spaces as catalysts for growth rather than periods of fear. We have come to see that the discomfort of transitions is not an obstacle, but a signpost pointing towards opportunities for radical self-discovery. Like our ancestors who marked transitions with sacred rituals and ceremonies, we too can find meaning and purpose in these in-between states, adapting those rituals to a modern interpretation that aligns with our contemporary needs. It is important to remember that the unease of transition is not a modern phenomenon. Ultimately, it is in the willingness to embrace the disorientation of liminal spaces that we can discover our truest selves. Our exploration of liminality reflects the universal human quest to find stability and meaning amidst the inevitable flux of life. Like seeds buried in the darkness of the earth, we too must embrace the void of transition to blossom into our fullest potential. It is in the dark that we truly grow. This understanding of archetypes invites us to reconsider how we approach challenges, recognizing the hidden resources within ourselves. By consciously navigating transitions, we can cultivate greater resilience, authenticity, and a deeper sense of connection to ourselves and the world around us. I would ask that each of you begin to notice any automatic tendencies they have during times of transition, and to gently guide them to more productive thoughts and actions. Thank you for joining me on this journey.